Britain declared war on Germany on the 4th of August 1914. Many men flocked to the call of duty to sign up and fight for king and country. But on the 2nd of August, there had been a peace march with thousands of people in Trafalgar Square. Not everyone believed there should be a war between Britain and Germany, two countries who had historically always been friends, at all levels of society, including the very top. The King and the Kaiser were cousins.
Yeah, he's like determined as ever.
Afternoon, chaps.
Hello.
Not bad, how much?
Yeah, nice. Needed it. After a very long morning.
Fantastic.
Where have you been then?
Oh, I just had a little errand to run.
Care to divulge?
I signed up to the army, mate.
Oh, well done.
Thank you very
You
much.
shouldn't tell me I was with you.
Oh, you should have said.
I'll sign up.
Not all men thought that their duty was to take up arms and fight. Men of faith and Quakers were among these. Still wanted to support the war, and the Friends Ambulance Service, the FAU, was formed in early September 1914. These men were incredibly brave, working on the front line as volunteers, being shot at and saving countless lives of the wounded.
The Friends Ambulance Unit was first found during the First World War in 1914 by a group of individuals who were Quakers. They were formed, they volunteered to help the people who had suffered and got injured during the war. And they started off as a really small, just a group of friends who just wanted to do this, and gradually they increased, and 100 years later now it's spread worldwide.
A Quaker is a person who follows a religion which tells them not to participate in any war other than if you're helping the people who are wounded. So they're essentially just trying to help anyone in any way they can to stop any suffering. I know that about 16,000 Quakers refused to fight in the First World War, but most of them did help out.
I became a Quaker because I objected to certain things in other religions. I wasn't brought up to follow any particular religion. I was left to roam free, if you like. I had friends who were perhaps Catholics or Methodist, Baptist, and sometimes used to go off with them and didn't feel particularly comfortable, didn't mean that much to me. But I would say I've always been spiritual, so I felt there was something else, but I didn't really want someone to be telling me that I should have this ritual or do that, and there were certain things that I don't believe in the Bible. And as I went through life, I heard of the Quakers and I thought, well, that sounds good to me. I'm a pacifist. I like the idea of their acceptance of everybody. And so at a very much older stage, I just gradually went in, and the very first meeting I thought, this is it. I think I've always been a Quaker, really.
A way of life, not a belief. That's what Quakers say. It only matters what you do, not what you believe. So some Quakers believe in God, some don't.
I like the idea that you respect every other person. It doesn't matter where they come from, how they are an individual that demands respect. And we're taught also as Quakers to listen very carefully to what other people say. So we may be a bit startled by an opinion or a belief, but we must listen and hear where they're coming from and try to have a greater understanding. We're on this earth, we're very diverse, and there's no reason why we can't coexist peacefully.
I think one of the key words that Quakers use is experience. That it's if you go to a meeting for worship, it's about sharing experience. So people may get up and speak about their particular experience, what they've been through, what they believe, what they think, and so on and so forth. And it's through that process of sharing experience the Quakers derive their approach to life, rather than being told this is what you've got to believe, this is the answer. In other words, the answer is always evolving, the answer is emerging, and the answer is something that might be different for different people. But I think what we have in common is we believe that it's important to share that experience and to listen to each other and to tolerate different opinions, but to respect each other. And I suppose that's where it ties in with the peace testimony, that you can't really respect somebody and kill them.
I think a Quaker is a pacifist, tries to keep an open mind, is tolerant, or at least we try to be tolerant, and respectful of others, we try to be.
One of the key phrases that people often use is that of God in everyone. So people have different conceptions of God, but the idea is that everybody has their own insight, and that you must try and discover that of God in other people. So, I mean, Bob, for example, has been involved in a lot of work in prisons with people who are put in prison because they've done bad things. But you try and find that of God in the other person, and that's what we believe.
And I think because we're pacifists, some people think you're crackpots. You're a bit wacky. There have always been wars. We're conditioned to have wars. Armaments is big business. We go against the grain. Quakers are not conformists. It's actually, you have to be quite brave to go against the trend. And some people are more comfortable going with it, so that leaves you an outsider. Therefore, you're got a screw loose, really, a bit odd. Although, on the other hand, I think Quakers are greatly respected by some people because we do put ourselves on the line and have protested against slavery and things like that.
I'm a Quaker chaplain. I do in fact offer pastoral support to anybody, regardless of any religion they may hold or not. But there happens to be a Quaker prisoner, a chap who became a Quaker after being in prison for 20 years. I see him regularly and offer him friendship. We are the Society of Friends, and he and I have friendship.
And I remember going on a demonstration once. It was an American airbase, and before your time, of course, but there were all these American airbases with cruise missiles that were brought in. And Britain was the sort of front line in the Cold War then, and we went on this demonstration, and it was snowing, and there was all this snow everywhere at the perimeter of this base, and we knelt down in the snow, and there were all these policemen in front of us, and that was really quite a profound experience, because I think they were quite sort of shocked and didn't know, we weren't sort of trying to get into the base, we weren't sort of shouting at them, we were just witnessing that we thought this base was wrong, and that cruise missiles were wrong, and we were doing it in our way. So I think that was quite a profound experience for me. Not all conscientious objectors are Quakers. There are a lot of conscientious objectors who object on political grounds, or they might be Jehovah's Witnesses, there might be other sorts of Christians, just believe that killing is wrong. So, and that there are some Quakers who are not conscientious objectors. I mean, Bob was in the RAF for a time. So they're not identical at all. As soon as the war started, the Friends Ambulance Unit was set up because Quakers felt that they ought to actually do something to alleviate the suffering of war. So Quakers set up the Friends Ambulance Unit soon after the start of the war, and that actually worked on the front line as an ambulance unit, helping soldiers who were wounded and so on, and ran hospitals in France and in Britain as well. So Quakers were involved in that. They were also involved in something called the Friends Relief Service, which was helping refugees and so on. So there was that level. Then when conscription was introduced, Quakers reacted in some ways. Some did actually join the army. Some decided this was their patriotic duty and joined the army. Some agreed to do alternative work, such as working in hospitals or on the land or whatever. And some decided they didn't want anything to do with the war effort and were known as absolutists. And some of those got sent to prison, either civilian prison or military prison. So some of them were made to go into the army, and if they refused to wear a uniform, they were put in military prison. And that's when some of them were condemned to death, of course, and only reprieved at the last minute. Because we wouldn't deny that there's always going to be conflict. People are always going to disagree. It's how you deal with that disagreement. It's how you respond to those disagreements. Do you resort to armed force, or do you try and find a way of sorting the problems out?
Yes, I mean for sure. If you've got an opponent, and you have conflict with that person, obviously killing them, you shut them up beautifully. But in doing so, you create hatred, ideas of revenge. War has never ever solved anything.
At the same time, there were others who believed that war, any war, was fundamentally wrong. They believed in brotherhood. They believed in non-violence. They also believed that the longer war went on, that Britain would introduce conscription for the first time in history. Fenner Brockway started the No Conscription Fellowship in November 1914, asking those who did not want to fight to get in contact. By 1915, the membership was so large that they had to open offices in Fleet Street, London.
They kept records of every conscientious objector and person that went there to get exemption, and they knew everything about them, about their family, where they went to prison, what they said during the tribunal, and everything really about them. But women were involved as well. Firstly, as family of CEOs, they faced the hostility of family and neighbours, and secondly, as workers in the organisation itself, especially as male members were imprisoned. The government also tried very hard to suppress the Tribunal, which was a weekly newspaper that wrote about what happened in the tribunals, and they tried to destroy it as well by destroying the machinery and the printers. But the No Conscription Fellowship had a secret press that kept the magazine and newspaper coming out all the time.
We've been researching white feathers, silver badges and music. In the war, young women were given white feathers to give out to men who didn't fight, to show like they were cowards, to kind of pressurise them into fighting in the war. I think it spread quickly because the women felt empowered over the men, because they were they felt like they were in charge of whether the men went or not to war. Because they weren't able to be in the war themselves.
Yeah.
Maybe it was their contribution to it.
And they were finally like better than some of the men, because the conscientious objectors were like seen as not men, not very important to the war. So women giving out white feathers, like maybe like making the men go to war, they were like finally better, because it was still quite like, oh, men are better than women, and they were finally had like one up. If a man didn't have a uniform on, then they would give a white feather to him. He could have been like discharged or anything, but they wouldn't know, and they were just sort of like, well, you know, it didn't matter to them as much, so they just sort of gave it to them anyway. And so then, you know, if you did fight, you could still get one.
It must be quite embarrassing to be given one as well, especially if you were fighting and for some reason you had to stop and then being given one.
And if you were underage, you could be given one as well. Like, if you looked older, sometimes, you know, like younger men or boys would be given one, and then they could, like, they would go sign up because they didn't want to be given one and see it to be a coward, and they would just like lie about their age if they were tall enough or, you know, like looked older than they were, and that sometimes happened.
Where are you guys? Come on.
I'm not sure if I can, to be honest.
What's that?
Well, I don't think it's not in my faith to, kill someone. I can do something like that.
I forgot you were God Squad.
That's a bit harsh.
So, what?
That's a bit harsh.
We always talk like that.
Yeah, I know, but this is quite sensitive to just say God Squad when we're talking about something as important as death.
Well, Sam, king and country.
There was a strong sway of public opinion to persuade men to volunteer to fight. Men who did not were considered cowards. The Military Service Act came into force on 2nd of March 1916 and applied to unmarried men aged between 18 and 41. In this act was a conscience clause, and the term conscientious objector and conchies was born. The No Conscription Fellowship had by this time gathered a huge membership. From March 1916, they published a weekly newspaper called the Tribunal. The government tried hard to suppress the paper, raiding offices and dismantling printing machinery, arresting the people involved and sending some of them to prison, both men and women.
My research was on Bert Brocklesby. At his tribunal in Doncaster in 1916, he was asked, supposing you were in a corner with your back to a wall and 6 men before you with open sword of fixed bayonet, would you do something if you had a revolver in your hand? Bert replied, the 6th command says, thou shalt not kill. I take it that it is better to be killed than kill anyone else. After that, Bert was told that he was forced into the army, but he was told he didn't have to fight and he could just help out with driving and ambulances. And he refused because he said that's still aiding the wars and it's still helping people kill other people.
These men would have nothing to do with the war at all, and they were regarded as absolutists. They refused to do anything that would in some way support the war. Many of these men were also men of strong faith and believed that they would rather face death themselves than kill another human being.
They made conscientious objectors not look like proper people and made them feel like maybe get normal people to not like them more so the conscientious objectors can't handle the pressure, so then they melt and then they think, oh, actually maybe it's just best if I just do it, and then everyone will forget about it. If maybe propaganda wasn't used, people wouldn't have thought so badly upon them, but because they made it sound so bad about like what they were doing and their way that they refused to kill someone, and even if it was like someone else's life that they could have saved, they wouldn't save it, and made it sound a lot worse when they were just sticking by their beliefs, which is everyone's got their own beliefs.
I don't really understand why they needed to use propaganda, because no matter how many people they put against the conscientious objectors, it still wouldn't have changed their mind. And I don't think that the aggression on the conscientious objectors from the public crowd would have mattered to them, because it's what they believe and how they feel about it.
I'm talking about being British, serving the British Parliament, the British monarch, and defending the country against oppressors. There.
So you're saying everybody should sign up then?
Everybody who's able should be able to sign up.
What about Sam here? He's got his faith. The Bible says thou shalt not kill. I'm happy to fight for my country, and I will fight for my country. But people like Sam, he has religion.
Well, there are other things he can do.
I'm
He
happy
can sign up and do, build guns, build weapons, make the food to send to our soldiers out there who are
That's
brave
still-
enough.
Doing stuff like
Do
that is still greasing the war machine. It is completely pointless. Even if you work in an ammunition factory, you are still going to be making bullets that is going to kill someone.
Hang on a minute.
Could you look somebody in the eye and shoot them without knowing who they are, without
To
knowing
protect
what
our
they
families, yes.
But what about their families? Think of the grief you are
If
going
I don't kill them, they'll kill me.
Exactly.
That's why you do not sign up.
If you don't want to sign up, fine. But if we want to protect our families, protect what we stand for, then we should have the right
You
to
have
sign
to
up.
remember something. They've already signed up.
Ben,
There are 1 million people over there signed up wanting to kill us, invade our shores, kill
To defend
your
ourselves.
family. 6 weeks. 6 weeks we've been at war. And you're too cowardly.
I'm not a coward.
You are a
I'm
coward.
not a coward. I just believe in my own moral obligations.
Moral obligations.
To
So what are you going to do?
humans, to humanity.
Run and hide?
No, I'm not going to run and hide. I'm going to fight this peacefully.
Fight
There
it peacefully.
is a way around this without having to kill everybody in their way.
Everybody in
Yes.
their way.
This is
That's
just-
exactly what they're going to do unless people like me stand up for us.
The students discovered that Duncan Grant and David Garnett were conscientious objectors who had moved to Charleston Farmhouse to avoid the war. The students visited Charleston Farmhouse to see how they lived.
Duncan James was born on 21st of January 1885. He was an artist and quite a peaceful man, seeing that he didn't want to fight in wars, and became a Quaker who was an artist and I think became a poet later. And he lived a hard life because he was living in a poverty-stricken family. His father was poverty-stricken, and he worked hard and became an artist to get some money to bring his family up and live a sustainable life and thoughts. And that explains why he didn't want to fight the war, because he was a man of peace, not really a man of action. He moved to Charleston, Sussex.
I'm doing about David Garner. He was a conscientious objector in the First World War. He joined a Friends war mission in France to help people who were injured, and in 1916 he came back to England and worked on a farm with other conscientious objectors. So he was just trying to help out in any way he could, as long as he didn't have to kill anyone.
Tribunals were set up to hear the cases of men who did not want to be called up. Their objective was to ensure as many men were called up as possible. Many conscientious objectors were forced into the army, and then were subjected to punishments and torture to force them to fight. Others were imprisoned and subjected to harsh rules regarding food, enforced silence and solitary confinement, while others were forced into hard labour. After the war, priority for jobs was given to men who had served, and some conscientious objectors remained in prison long after the war had ended. The stigma of being a conchi haunted these men, affecting their lives long after the war, some for the rest of their lives.
I'm Jenny Swindell. I'm the granddaughter of Horace Constable Woolard and Clara Louisa Woolard.
I'm Sue Johnston. I'm Jenny's sister, so all those bits apply to me as well.
We have experience within the family of our grandfather having been a conscientious objector in the First World War, and our father being a conscientious objector in the Second World War.
Well, we used to visit at Christmas, because they lived in Colchester, we were in Spalding. We used to go and visit them as children at Christmas, because he'd retired, and during the summer holidays. So I remember him as being a very caring and peaceful man. One thing I do remember, which I only sort of thought about this morning, I can remember as a child being vaguely in the background when we were out somewhere and he was talking to another man who'd come up and was telling him something. He was telling our grandfather, whatever it was, and I thought, as I was vaguely listening, I thought, well, I know actually that he knows that. Why is he letting this man tell him all over again? And after a little while I realised that actually this was very much the man. He was letting this chap carry on telling him this because it was making the man feel better. He didn't need to know that my grandfather already knew this, and if my grandfather had said, it's all right, I know all that, it would have made the man feel awkward. So this is very much, I think, probably a measure of the man. He was extremely humane, kind, gentle, quiet, reserved man.
He was tall. He'd been bald since he was 26. He had a wicked sense of humour. In his later years he used to wear little half glasses, which he would put on the top of his head and make us laugh as children, because he would wriggle his forehead until the glasses came down his nose. He and my grandmother had a long marriage. They were very young when they got married. I think she was not yet 20 when they married. He was 4 years older. And one of the things that's quite incongruous, really, that I remember being said of him, that he had been particularly drawn to her because she had very clean ears.
I hadn't heard that before.
Haven't you?
No.
Well, he had lived
a long
through
time.
the war, the First World War, when food was in very short supply. One of the things that we always said of Gran, we would quote her and say, we can't have it wasted. No food must ever be wasted. So however it was concocted, it was eaten.
And of course, later on, this was particularly pertinent when he was in prison for being a conscientious objector, and she, with 2 young children, only in her sort of mid-20s maybe by then, not late 20s at all, with a sort of 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and husband gone to prison, no breadwinner, and she
no
had
social
to
security
no
either.
social security, no NHS, nothing like that. She had to do what was called then going on the parish, and I suppose the equivalent today would be the food banks. Really, I can't think of a nearer equivalent. But times were extremely hard for her, for them, for all of them. Character building, maybe you might say. She was a toughie, wasn't she?
She was. They both were.
Yeah, they'd come through a lot. They were both Methodists, had a strong faith and attended regularly the Methodist chapel, which would have been in Wattersfield in Suffolk, I think. And when the war came and things were hotting up, and generally the country was being asked to go and fight and join up and so on, he was very concerned about this. He was a God-fearing man. He couldn't get over the thou shalt not kill in any way or form. And he went to his minister at the church and said these things, that he couldn't bear to do this. He couldn't bring himself, he couldn't see any way that was possible. The minister, who was clearly a rather more militant sort of chap, told him to go out and fight the Hun, go out and kill the Hun, which he really couldn't do. As a result of which, of course, I don't know how they got to a tribunal process, but conscientious objectors, which he then was, were required to appear before a tribunal. I think you need to take over here because you know more about that than I do.
Yes, they do. I think probably one of the things that I should say is that the atmosphere within the country was all very much pro-war, and Kitchener was doing a very big job with posters, encouraging people into the war and so forth. And there were adverts in the Times, I think, asking that women should send in their petticoats for able-bodied men who were not fighting. So it was a very difficult situation to stand against. And yes, he did stand against it, even though I think as a saddler and harness maker, he would have been in a protected profession. I think he wouldn't have been required to stand against it and fight.
It was an agricultural community.
Absolutely.
And they needed saddlers and harness
Absolutely.
makers.
Yes, they did, although of course a lot of horses had already been sent to the front. And yes, he continued to object. He was a conscientious objector, and he did appear before a military tribunal. They decided that he should go to prison, and he was sent to Wormwood Scrubs, which is where he met up with the other Quakers, or the Quakers. He wasn't at that stage a Quaker. And subsequently, the local people in Suffolk, because they couldn't get their harnesses and their saddles repaired, got up a petition which they sent to the tribunal, and he was then released from prison. I don't know how long he was in Wormwood Scrubs.
I thought it was only about 2 or 3 months, wasn't it?
I don't know.
I got a feeling it was about 2 or 3 months.
But
that would be a long time if you're relying in an agricultural community on horse-drawn ploughs, horse-drawn everything really, and you needed your harness repairing, which would have happened. And the country more and more was needing agriculture to work because they needed the produce to feed the country. So there was quite a lot of pressure on them to get on with it, I think, and get them back out again.
I think they were very brave, very courageous people who had obviously given their stance a great deal of very careful thought and were prepared to stand against the tide, which is always a very difficult thing to do.
It wasn't an easy way out. It wasn't a coward's way out. I think, was it in the First World War or the Second World War that they were shot? They were forced to join up so that they could then face, again, some kind of tribunal and be shot. There was no way it was ever the easy way out. If your conscience tells you, I cannot go out and kill another person who's not done anything to me and who's in the same position as I am, do you go with your conscience, or do you do what your government, and governments do sometimes make mistakes, do you do what they tell you? I don't know. In the Second World War, our father, newly married, taken over the family business, again, so agricultural saddler, harness maker, and so on, and still in 1939 to 45, very important work, and again, a reserved occupation. Was also a Quaker and a conscientious objector. Now, the impact on them as a family was quite considerable. The family business premises were tarred and feathered. Can you imagine that? You know, you come back to your home and your business premises and it's covered with tar, quite difficult to get rid of, and scattered with feathers, indicating actually that the general community thought that they were cowards. Friends disowned them. The best man, our father's best man from his wedding, crossed the street to avoid them, and when they went to the cinema and he was just a bit further along, he got up and went out, left. So they had a tough time. They lost a lot, probably most of their friends. We don't know what the impact was within the family, which would be interesting because his brother-in-law, my mother's brother-in-law, was an RAF officer, and his family came back to where our parents were living for the duration of the war because it was a slightly safer place than where they were, presumably in London, were they? Kingston? Yes. So his family there whilst he was out being an RAF officer. So I don't think it's the easy option or the easy way out. You may then ask, is it unpatriotic? I don't know. Is it unpatriotic? What is patriotism? Is it my country right or wrong? or is it most of us feel a strong bond with our country and feel that what our government does, we'd like to be kind of representative of what we feel ourselves, but it doesn't always get it right, doesn't always happen. Are we? I don't know. It's a very, very loaded discussion and a very, very tricky one. They didn't seem to have many close friends, not such as probably most of us do have now, but that may well be, I expect it is, that they lost an awful lot because of the conscientious objector thing. And you can see, if you were perhaps part of the wider community where friends and relatives had gone to the war and been killed, that they might feel quite badly about these people who were seemingly safe. I don't know. It's another question, isn't it?
Grandad used to have, well, they both used to have, in their downstairs loo, they had quite a long saying, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of, any good that I can do, let me do it now. Yes. I shall not pass this way again. There's a lot more to it than that, but that was just typical of them, really.
They had strong beliefs, and their lives echoed these beliefs right through. You know, they
enacted.
They
their
did.
Beliefs. They lived their beliefs.
Yes, and not many of us really perhaps do that now. I don't know.
The 15th of May is National Conscientious Objectors Day. Tribute is paid to these men who had the courage of their convictions to say no to killing another man. While we honour those who fought for their country, we also remember those who felt a different call of duty to their faith and to their fellow man. Those who felt that the only way to achieve peace was not to fight, not to kill.